Well, I would like to welcome one and all to today's webinar. As you can see, today's webinar will be on the topic of inflammation, help or hindrance. We have commentaries, or there have been comments on both sides of that question. As we come along, as we continue, you can go ahead and send in any questions that you may have. And if we can, we'll answer them as we're going along, or we will go ahead and answer those questions near the end, because sometimes as we continue with the slides, your questions may be answered. Now, next is I am Dr. Fernando Labrada, chiropractor, DC, QME. As you can see here, I've been a chiropractor for over 20 years. I'm a certified disability evaluator through the International Chiropractic Association, also certified qualified medical examiner for the California Department of Workers' Compensation. I am a USANA associate since 2004, and I met my wife at the annual convention in the amphitheater on Wednesday, September 15th of 2004. Now, I do remember dates in spite of what my wife may say. I took a tour of the hospital in 2004, and back then I told myself that one day I will be working here at the hospital. I started working here in June of 2012. My wife and I have 7 children and 9 grandchildren. Currently here at the hospital, I have been entrusted with being the supervisor over non-medical health professionals, which include Department of Structural Medicine, Spa, colon hydrotherapy, nutritional department, the kitchen, the garden, organic garden, fitness department, psychology, and overseeing USANA research and development. So I wear many hats. And I know a little bit about several things, but not very much. Okay, so we will continue. The 5 cardinal signs of inflammation. Inflammation, help or hindrance. All of us at one time have experienced an inflammatory process, whether we have injured ourselves, we have cut ourselves, and we see how the body responds by providing, sealing up the area, cordoning it off. Sometimes it may get a little bit swollen, and it get hot. Sometimes we have some pain associated with it. Several factors, generally 5 symptoms of inflammation. But the question is, does it help us or hinder us? What is inflammation? First question. We think of it's hot, it hurts, it burns. It actually is the body's attempt at self-protection, the aim being to remove harmful stimuli, including damaged cells, irritants, or pathogens, and it begins the healing process. It is your immune system field of battle. Try to think if you can. Try to imagine, if you will. You have a bunch of soldiers waiting, barracked in your body. And they're called upon, different soldiers, to come in and to start holding back the troops, start minimizing damage to other areas. They have to bring in special equipment to help repair the damaged area, while others are there helping get rid of debris, cleaning up. All of this is part of the immune system's field of battle of what we refer to as the inflammatory response. How does it work? Well, I gave you a brief overview, and we're going to try to keep it simple. We're not going to be talking about chemicals and all that stuff, but it all starts when the cells in our body become damaged in some way. We'll talk a little bit about those general categories that may damage the cells a little bit further on. There are several steps involved once the damage has occurred, Once a cell is damaged, it begins to leak its contents into the surrounding tissues and cells. Remember, our cells, if you'd like to think about it, our cells are like little bags of water. And those little bags of water contain a bunch of different things inside. Some of those are energy, some of them are little manufacturing plants, some of them are duplication centers, some of them are other cells or cell-like entities that help protect and maintain order within the cell, and they're designed to stay inside the cell itself. So when the cell itself gets injured, it starts to leak out. And as it leaks out into surrounding tissues and cells, then the body starts responding with the soldiers, or in other words, with the inflammatory response. The damage can be from anything, and we'll cover that in a moment. Damaged cells in the immediate vicinity secrete several chemicals, including histamine. Now, many of you may be familiar with histamine. Most of us, several of us may have experienced times when it's hard to breathe when we are, it's hard to breathe when we have a cold. And the histamine helps the blood vessels to open up and to increase their permeability, to increase dilation, increase blood flow. So what do? We take antihistamine to stop that action so that we can breathe easier. Well, when we damage the cells within the cell itself, some of the things that leak out of it includes histamine, which increases, as I mentioned, the permeability of the surrounding capillaries, allowing repair cells easier access to the damaged area. What happens is that the blood vessel itself begins to expand and get larger. As it gets larger, this is because of the histamine, as it gets larger, the cells themselves separate. They don't have that close-knit pattern. They separate, and as they separate, they allow different proteins and molecules to pass through the wall that would otherwise not be allowed to pass through. That's, like I mentioned originally, the soldiers start bringing in the different types of equipment. Vasodilation increases the flow of blood to the area, producing the characteristic redness, swelling, and warmth associated with inflammation. The additional blood brings more repair cells and defensive chemicals. Again, the soldiers are coming in, they're bringing in their triage units, they're bringing in soldiers to clean up the mess, they're bringing in combatants or defensors to go ahead and ward off any enemy combatants that may be entering, such as bacteria, such as dirt that may be in the area. You have different soldiers that come in and attack that, and they surround it and keep it from going any further in the body. It's also interesting to note that during this whole process, there's actually a group of soldiers that come in and they actually put up a barricade around the injured area. And it's interesting because that barricade, when the inflammatory process is continual and precise, that barricade is dissolved once the repair process has finished. If it doesn't dissolve, it ends up actually being an impediment, an interference to the body's actions and to the body's functions. Increased blood flow is one of the things because we have increased movement. It removes toxins and dead cells from the area. The other thing that starts to increase blood flow is that we also have cortisol, and the cortisol is also allows the metabolic system to increase its metabolic rate and thereby increasing blood flow as well. So far, everything that has occurred is within what the normal response should be. The inflammation turn-off switch is supposed to start almost immediately once the inflammation is activated. We talked about there are several categories. I mentioned there are several categories or causes of inflammation. Generally, we think that everything is an itis. Itis referring to some type of infection. But an infection is not the only thing that can cause inflammation. They can be categorized, the three general categories can be categorized into three areas. They can be either physical, chemical, mental, and emotional. Now the first two, physical and chemical, may make a lot of sense. But then you look at it and you say, mental and emotional? What's with that? Well, we'll talk a little bit about that as we go along. We'll look at each one of these individually to get a simplified understanding of how they can influence our body's equilibrium. In the physical sense, we have somatic part of the body and the visceral part of the body. The somatic part of the body refers to, if you will, let's keep it limited to damage to the outside or damage to the skin or to the skin surface or its layers. To the muscles themselves, if you will. Okay. The visceral part, we're looking at the organs, damage that can be caused either to the guts or the intestinal tract, the stomach, the heart, the lungs, the organs that lie within. The physical damage can occur from any number of sources, including trauma, accidental or otherwise, and many times it may occur without even us noticing it. How can that be? Think about when you eat something that doesn't agree with you. It upsets your stomach, it upsets your bowels, your large and small intestines. It may upset your digestion to the point that instead of the food staying in your body for a while, it has a tendency of running right through and coming right out. That can be an example of an inflammatory process or a physical damage that may occur unnoticed. Other types of damage can be damage that's occurring to the heart as a result of either cholesterol, chemical activities. Our lungs can be damaged from noxious stimulants or irritants, and we'll be talking about that as far as irritants go a little bit further. Chemicals. Most of us are familiar with those. We're familiar with drugs that we take, either over-the-counter medication or prescribed medication. Most of those have synthetic binders that the body doesn't really accept at all. It's not natural to the body. Most drugs, they interfere with the normal processes. That's their purpose. And the purpose is to interfere with the process that's occurring to allow the body to shift into another process. Not designed to be taken forever, but society, or what we are used to, has made that more the norm than not. Just as herbs are used to shift the body into another paradigm, drugs do also. But the sustained use can do great harm to the normal physiologic functions. And that's where we get to where we talk about, is it damaging to the body or is it not? Another part of chemical stress or cause of inflammation can be from environmental causes. It can be exposure to toxins which affect the chemical process within the body. Those toxins can be something simple as the smell or the odor of new carpeting. It can be the paint, the odor of paint on the wall. It can be the exhaust system from cars, the exhaust that's produced. It can be from a pollen which brings about a chemical reaction within the body. It can be due to pesticides. It can be due to herbicides. It can be from the food we eat. It can be from the water we drink. It can be from the, we don't drink air, but from the air we breathe. Little typos. Okay. Foods. Pro-inflammatory foods. Why do we call them pro-inflammatory? Because they start a irritation to our system. Some of the more common ones, we have 10 of them here. Sugar. Okay, we're not saying that sugar, all sugar is bad, is that some sugars are much better for us than others. We have some cooking oils, such as corn oil or safflower oil, cottonseed, or safflower soy. We have trans fats that can increase bad cholesterol, It promotes inflammation. It can promote obesity and resistance to insulin. Another thing with trans fat or resistance to insulin is that cortisol also does that as well. And we'll talk about that in the next coming slides. Dairy. Why kefir and some yogurts are acceptable. Dairy is hard on the body. Why? Recent studies demonstrate that it isn't so much the dairy as it is the chemicals that are given to the animals which produce the dairy. So there is a discussion that can be taken as far as what specifically are the irritants. Is it the actual product, or is it the product, the additions to the production of the product that cause the irritation? Another one, same thing with feedlot raised meat. Many animals who are fed with grains like soy and corn contain high inflammatory responses in the body. A lot of that again goes to what they are consuming that we end up consuming. As we continue with number 6, we have red and processed meat. Same thing. It has to deal with the processing of the meat, whether red or not. Alcohol. We're talking about regular consumptions because it alters the body's chemistry. Whenever we alter the body's chemistry, we're going to have some type of inflammatory or protective response. Refined grains. We say refined products because there's no fiber and they usually have some type of high glycemic index. And the refined products, our body still has to break it down, but there are very little nutrients within the body that within the refined products that our body can go ahead and accept. Artificial food additives. Once again, artificial food additives. Those are key. All three of those are key words. The body is designed to work within nature. The body is designed to be nourished by natural means. And sometimes when we add additives, our body doesn't respond very well to that. A typical example is aspartame and MSG, which are two common food additives that can trigger inflammatory responses. Now, these inflammatory responses, you may or may not see them as an effect on your skin. Many times, they can be just responses as a sneeze, where you may eat something and you sneeze, or you may eat something and within a few minutes your nose may itch, or your throat may tickle, or your eyes may water. All of those are triggers to inflammatory processes. The body is letting you know that it doesn't like what it has ingested or has just occurred. In the fill-in blank, the question you need to ask is, do you constantly have headaches or you feel tired? We're not designed to constantly have headaches or feel tired. Occasionally, yes, but the body should repair itself if we allow it to, and it should work efficiently. Sometimes you may develop an allergy to a food and not even know it. And many times what we say may be an allergy may in actuality be a sensitization to a certain food. Coffee, certain vegetables, and cheeses may be a trigger and you may not even be aware of it. Now, a lot of this has to do with, again, sensitization of our system to specific things within the foods that we are eating. It may not necessarily be the actual food, the major component of the food. Mental, emotional. Oh, there's lots of things to talk about, mental or emotional. It causes a stress response. I imagine who here that is listening has not had some type of stress response to an emotional event. Whether that stress response is the tightness in the neck, in the shoulders, tightness in the chest, the palpitations of heart, the perspiration of your hands or of your body or your limbs, the headaches that may be produced. One of the reasons is because of cortisol. I mentioned that previously. Cortisol helps us get into what we refer to as a fight or flight response. It helps us get ready, and it shifts our body's energy reserves to the muscles in case we need to react to the situation that's being presented to us. Generally speaking, the cortisol levels usually come on, last for a moment, and then shut off. Once again, when those become chronic, they have a tendency of causing problems. The cortisol level increases the release of histamine. It causes that vasodilation in the system. That's, remember the histamine where you feel like your nose is clogged up and you can't breathe. And it hypersensitizes the body to other things. Yes, it does decrease inflammation initially. The good thing, which is a good thing, but it desensitizes the body to insulin, which long-term can create a bigger problem. What happens when it desensitizes the body to insulin? Your pancreas has to produce higher and higher concentrations of insulin in order for your body, in order to pull the sugar out of the blood and have the sugar enter the muscle cells, which is its primary purpose. The stress can suppress the immune response, which makes you more susceptible to disease and increases, again, inflammation. Why? Because think about it, if your immune response is suppressed and it's fighting off a common cold, rather than to be able to fight it off, you actually get the cold. What does a cold do? It becomes an invader. It becomes a pathogen to the system, and the system then needs to be able to fight off the invader. And so again, the battle troops, the soldiers come in and they start this battle against this invader, this response, this bacteria, this viral form, and it increases the inflammatory response in the body. What else does it do? Stress compromises your digestion and absorption. 70% of your immune system is in your gut. The normal gut flora gets out of balance, and this also increases susceptibility to the buildup of toxins and also to being able to not fight off any pathogens that may be coming your way. How many of you have noticed that when you're stressed, when you have a big stressor, your digestion is sort of a wee bit off? And if that lasts for any amount of time, you may notice that you have a tendency of not only getting tired, lack of energy, but many times you may also go ahead and feel sick, feel as if a flu is coming on. Again, we go back to, it's an inflammatory process and it's a response to an imbalance within the system. Because your gut flora gets out of balance, you have an impediment to the absorption of nutrients. And if this is long-term or continues over a period of time, it can lead to leaky gut. When does the inflammation become bad? Well, when it doesn't turn off. The fire continues and starts consuming more and more resources. As it consumes more and more resources, it causes more and more damage. That's one of the things that ends up happening. Inflammation is part of the body's immune response. Initially, it is beneficial when, for example, your knee sustains a blow and sustains a blow to the tissues, and your tissues need care and protection. It's a normal response. However, sometimes the inflammation can cause further inflammation. It can become self-perpetuating. More inflammation is created in response to existing inflammation. Now, as we mentioned previously, the inflammation may or may not be noticeable. It may be a low-grade inflammation. It may be something that's what you would consider mild. This isn't something that's obvious. As long as the inflammatory process is continuing, it starts to cause more and more damage. Low-grade chronic inflammation is characterized by a 2 to 3-fold increase in systemic concentrations of cytokines. Now, cytokines are signaling compounds that keep cell communication functioning at all times. I'd like you to go ahead and think about you are a teacher in a classroom. And as a teacher, you are trying to present information to the students. As you present the information to the students, you notice that the students are busy talking to each other. They are communicating. They are just nonstop communication. And they don't seem to be listening to what it is you're trying to say. That can create a little bit of chaos. They may not hear the message that you have to teach them or to present to them. In many ways, the cytokines are designed to talk and then shut off, to allow those cells that need to shut off time to shut off. When they don't, you get a miscommunication, and when that miscommunication occurs, the body suffers. At first reading, this would seem not to be a problem, except that some cells are supposed to turn off, and what ends up happening is a miscommunication, as I just mentioned, between the cells and within the body itself, bringing about more miscommunications. What happens when we miscommunicate? Things stop working. The inflammatory response must be actively terminated when no longer needed to prevent unnecessary bystander damage to the tissues. Failure to do so results in chronic inflammation and cellular destruction. And this is the crux of the story, if you will, that failure to turn off the inflammatory response can lead to cellular destruction. As cells become damaged and their reproduction of those cells continues, the reproductive defect from the damage also continues. Many of you may recall that every 7 years, every cell in our body has been replaced. So that you can think of every 7 years, you're a new person, at least body-wise. And if there are damages that occur within the cell that gets reproduced, with time, those reproductions become greater and greater. And as those reproductions, faulty reproductions or duplicates occur, it begins to upset or damage the balance between your body's equilibrium. That's one of the things that happens with cancer. Cancer in and of itself is an inflammatory process. It's a defect within the immune system, is what we are beginning to realize, and most medical communities are agreeing to that. Most chronic degenerative diseases are products of chronic inflammation of some type. The chronic degenerative diseases are myriad and manifold. It can lead to cancer, cardiovascular disease, neurologic disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's disease, autoimmune diseases, and arthritis. Inflammation seems to be the root at most of that. Many times, until recent history, it was thought that cholesterol was a problem with cardiovascular disease, as with neurologic diseases or autoimmune diseases. They are finding now that it isn't so much the cholesterol as the inflammatory process that is going on within the body, the uncontrolled inflammatory process that's going on within the body that is causing damage to the tissues. Again, uncontrolled chronic inflammation can lead to tissue damage, to increased permeability, not only within the circulatory system, but within the organs themselves. It can lead to cellular defects. As it leads to cellular defects, those cellular defects then become reproduced and multiplied, and then those cellular defects become reproduced and multiplied, and so on and so forth, till you end up with aberrant cells making up large portions of different parts of the body. That is what ends up happening. So returning to our initial question, is inflammation a help or a hindrance? Using the initial definition we started with, it's the body's attempt at self-protection, the aim being to remove harmful stimuli, including damaged cells, irritants, or pathogens, and to allow the healing process to begin. Is it a help or a hindrance? It's both. The inflammatory process is a normal response. What ends up making it a hindrance is when it becomes out of control. What is it that we can do to help reduce the irritants, whether physical, chemical, emotional, or mental? Well, the physical part is we need to take care of ourselves. We need to be able to exercise. We need to be able to eat correctly, not the pro-inflammatory foods, but the anti-inflammatory foods. As one of our nutritionists, as a couple of our nutritionists have mentioned before in previous webinars, there are certain foods that are anti-inflammatory to the body, that help the intestinal tract, the digestive tract repair, that allow the digestive enzymes to work efficiently, that allow the detoxification process of the body to work efficiently. A lot of the products that may be used, kidney cleanse, colon cleanse, are all good products, but they should be used sporadically, not constantly. In the chemical realm, we need to perhaps look at what are the things that we are exposed to. What are the pesticides? What are the chemicals that we have within our house? What are the medicines that we take or do not take? Even so far as saying, what are the herbs that you're taking? And perhaps might you be taking those herbs over too long a period of time? Remember that anything that we bring into our body should generally be for a short period of time to provide some type of nutritional component or change within the body that would allow it to return to its normal homeostasis or to its balance. When it comes to emotional or mental, 70% to 80% in studies that have been done found that most of the difficulties that occur with chronic degenerative diseases have their basis in emotions and mental wordings that we use. I like to think of it as, I use a term, I call it stinking thinking. I've adopted that term from another doctor who was trying to get several doctors to stop their stinking thinking and to correct their processors, if you were, to look at different areas of their businesses. Well, that stinking thinking works for us as well. Mental stressors are one of the main consumptions of energy in our body. And just as those emotions and mental language that we use with ourselves can stress our body either for good or for not so good, we need to be aware of those. Most negative emotions, whether acknowledged or not, bring stress to the body at some level. For those of you that are familiar with muscle testing, you can try a little experiment if you'd like. You can go ahead and get a baseline on an individual that you're muscle testing to make sure they're you're able to muscle test them, and go ahead and then give them certain words as you're telling them, and notice how words that are positive and uplifting will keep their body strong. Words that are negative or demeaning will weaken their body. It will cause a change physically, chemically within their bodies. As we look at that, we look at also the words that we use in making decisions. All of this can lead to an inflammatory process that may be out of check. It's important and imperative that we look at those aspects of the words we use, of the physical activity we do, of the physical positions that we place ourselves in. Going back to the physical stressors, are we resting enough, or are we pushing ourselves too much? Are we eating the proper foods? Are we eating the foods that our body will take advantage of? Or are we just eating those things that will just satisfy an emotional or mental need that may be inappropriate? The inflammatory process is wide and varied. It is a normal process, as has been mentioned before, and we need to be able to understand that it can be a dangerous process if left unchecked. How we go ahead and take care of that process is entirely within our hands. It literally is within your own world, within the choices that we make. Now, I would say thank you for the opportunity to share some thoughts about inflammation, some thoughts about physical, emotional, and chemical aspects of it. And I hope that you have gained some insight to the inflammatory process. Although it has been simplified for you, I think it's information that you can utilize and pass on, and I hope that you find it as such. And if there are any questions or that you would like, I will be here for a few more minutes. And if not, I thank you for your time and attention, and may your days be, may your wishes come true, and may you reach the goals you have set for yourself now and in the future. And thank you. I can't see that. Let's see. Wrong one. Okay, let's try this. We have a question that was posed, is how does chiropractic work help with inflammation? One of the things that chiropractic does is it helps restore normal neuromuscular skeletal relationships. It addresses both the physical aspect and the chemical aspect in releasing some of those stressors that can affect the inflammatory process that's present when the mechanisms of the body aren't working. An example is when one of the underlying structures, let's talk about a vertebra, if you will, is malpositioned, the muscles that connect to that cannot release their tension, and so they remain taut. As they're trying to maintain the position of the injured area, they actually end up splinting the area. We initiate an inflammatory response because of the sustained tension within the muscle. That in and itself starts, as those muscles fatigue, it starts recruiting larger and larger muscles. So we have not only an inflammatory response from the malpositioning and the poor mechanics in the joint, but we also have one of the overlying tissue. As that continues, then let me get you over here. As that continues, it becomes more and more chronic. And the more chronic something is, the longer it will take to go ahead and clear it. Another question, can you name some of the most common inflammations we can run into as amateur health specialists? The most common inflammations are probably going to be GI inflammations. They will be most of the inflammations generally be related to GI dysfunctions. If you're into the physical aspect of it, the physical aspect would be injury. Generally, it can involve the larger joints, such as the knee, the shoulder, or any of the extremities. Okay, damage. Okay, we have a question from Howard who wants to know inflammation from back pain or damage, how to help with diet and other techniques. The inflammation from back pain, you need, more specifically as opposed to coping with cortisol, first have to find out, need to find out what the inflammation, okay, you need to find out why the back pain is there to begin with. That will, once you identify what's going on, then you can go ahead and help with correction. One of the things that there is a relationship between mechanical dysfunction and organ dysfunction. An example of that relationship is the quads, the quadricep muscles, the muscles on top of the thigh. Those muscles are responsible for extending or straightening out the knee. As those muscles are tied in to the small intestine. If there is a problem with digestion, and I apologize for not speaking here, but I'm typing at the same time. Intestine. If the digestion is off, it will turn off the quads. and they will not function correctly, placing abnormal forces on the companion muscles. How does diet help? Diet helps a lot. Diet helps a lot. One of the things you can do is you need to go ahead and alter your diet if you have digestive difficulties. One of the important things we see, and it is almost, I would say 80 to 90% consistent with the patients that we see here at the hospital, is dehydration and problems with lymphatic system. Most of the time, most people are dehydrated and their lymphatic system isn't working correctly. If you can go ahead and get the lymphatic system working appropriately and drinking sufficient quantities of water, then the body starts responding quite easily. It starts responding, in fact, very dramatically. If a body is dehydrated, the psoas muscle, which is the main hip flexor of the body, gets weak and it doesn't function, which puts additional strain on the leg muscles and on the hip muscles. Now, the psoas muscle itself also initiates from the lower back, starting at the base of the rib cage, and also engages part of the inside of the hip, which is the iliacus muscle, to insert on the leg. So if the psoas muscle gets weak, you're going to have problems not only with your low back, you'll have problems with the your hip and the functioning of the hip, and also the SI joint. Okay, moving on to another question. Let's say, how would you work for a 5-year-old that breaks out? How would you work? Dairy-free, but still has issues with acne. Though her GI. We have a question here, which is, the question is, how would you work with a 5-year-old that breaks out in sores and itchy rashes, as well as his sister who has acne? She is on a gluten, soy, rice, dairy-free diet, but still has issues with her acne, though her GI is much better. In this case here, one of the things that you may want to look at is what other toxins may she be exposed to that you may not be aware of. One thing would be to check to see if her digestion is correct. Another thing is that there's a relationship between, again, her GI is much better. If she's already in gluten, you may need to look at perhaps any cross-contamination that may be occurring from some other foods she may be eating. Okay, That's for Marilyn, which has left. Okay. Randy asks, can you discuss the specific USANA supplements as helpful anti-inflammatories? Well, one of those would be the proflavanol. Okay. Proflavanol, the Biomega, and the CoQ, just to name a few. Okay. There has been studies done, Rosalie asked, there have been studies done on endurance training versus HIIT, H-I-T-T, which is interval training. Both stress the body in a good way, but the research is that interval training is better. Could you please comment on this with respect to your presentation on inflammation? Recent studies have been demonstrating that the interval training does allow for better recoup from muscle fatigue and metabolic energy requirements. I don't have much more information on that at the moment. Okay. Wow, Sandra. Sandra asks, I would like to know more about how stress causes inflammation. I think we talked about that a little bit. Let's see in what way. About stress causing inflammation. Okay. All stressors may cause, let me put it this way. Stress in and of itself is a normal response. It's not supposed to be long-term. When it becomes long-term, it leads to physiologic changes within the body that can and often do lead to inflammation. Stress sets off an adrenal response. The adrenals go ahead and inject cortisol. Cortisol, as we saw, goes ahead and releases histamine. Histamine is there to reduce inflammation. Histamine also goes ahead and makes the cells insulin resistant, or desensitizes the muscle cells to insulin. And so you need higher and higher levels of insulin to bring the sugar from the blood supply into the muscle cells where they should be. When the higher levels of insulin become too high, you end up having a lot of sugar circulating within the system, and that's when you put a stress on the pancreas, and you end up entering what's called metabolic syndrome. That in of itself will cause an inflammatory response, because as more and more sugar is being placed into the cells, the adipose cells, once you have metabolic syndrome, the normal response of sugar being placed into the muscles actually inverts, and you have more sugar being placed into the cells as a storage medium. Once that occurs, then the cells become more and more engorged, and as they engorge more, especially I'm talking specifically about midline adipose cells, they end up bursting, which causes, when they burst, it goes into the interstitial fluid, which sets off messengers that an inflammatory response initiates, a cascade initiates, and then you have that catch-22 where something is turned off, something is turned on. You have a chronic inflammation that's being caused, and the body sort of gets caught in a cycle or a catch-22 phase where it's constantly in an inflamed response, constantly in a repair response, constantly in a in trying to fix what's wrong. And so stress, whether it's physical, chemical, or mental, is one of the leading causes of that inflammatory response. I hope I answered your question, Sandra. What are some foods that help reduce inflammation? Tammy, some foods that help reduce inflammation. Well, natural yogurt. We have whole, generally speaking, whole organic foods. Kefir is one of them. There is actually a list, several lists online that you can find. I don't have that right off the top of my head. We know that certain herbs can also help reduce inflammation. Most of the nightshades are not are pro-inflammatory, not anti-inflammatory. And that's pretty much what I can help you with that, Tammy. Tia, how do you control chemical inflammation long term? You have to identify which chemicals are the ones that may be causing need to ID which chemicals may be causing the problem. Once identified, then you can do a plan to help your body eliminate the chemical from your system from your system. Tia, you need to go ahead and be able to identify which chemicals those are. Salon chemicals, ugh, they're notorious. Chemicals are notorious for messing with the body. You need to take proper precautions, which I believe you may already be taking, and start to include in your diet foods that may pull out toxins from your body. An example may be to start including cilantro as a regular condiment or spice, as you may consider it. Cilantro is a natural detoxifier that pulls metals out of the body. Pulls metals out of the body. Wow. Salon chemicals, Tia. There is, if you go ahead and Tia, if you go ahead and send me an email message, I can go ahead and help you with getting some information as far as specifically things that you can use to help pull out some of the chemicals you're exposed to. Okay. Thank you, Tia. How does your Vicky? Chiropractic work with inflammation. I mentioned that a little while ago. Okay, thank you. Amazing, Vicky. What was that chemical? I don't know which chemical you're talking about, Vicky. What's that chemical? Oh, the salon chemicals. The salon chemicals that Tia was talking about is ammonia, thioglyconate, bleach, formaldehyde, and I'm sure there are a few others there that Tia may send. Okay. Okay, thanks. Vivian Poir, thank you. Granddaughter with, Wendy says, granddaughter with chronic eczema on the eyelids and neck and inside elbows. Any supplements or foods that would help or hinder? Most conditions that show up on the skin is usually a toxicity. Okay. Most conditions that show up on the skin is a form of toxicity. A detox regimen would probably help quite a bit. Is one antioxidant, okay, thank you, Wendy. And what, Wendy, for specific, what detox regimen? There's several of them that are out there. Again, you can go ahead and send me an email to fernando.labrada@sanoviv.com, and I will go ahead and get you some information on that. Okay. We have, is one antioxidant better than another, is what Yo is asking about. One antioxidant better than another? Yes and no. Different antioxidants work in different areas. Vitamin C works on the outside of the cell, whereas glutathione works on the inside of the cell. It really depends on the purpose you have in mind. Okay. All right. Okay, I've gone ahead and sent all of you that if you have any other questions, the email address, you can go ahead and send me that, and we will go ahead and answer any additional questions. At this point in time, I need to go ahead and close this webinar, and I'd like to thank each and every one of you for honoring me with your time, with your attention, and with your questions. And yes, this webinar will be available on the website, on YouTube as well. And with that, I thank you, and may you have a wonderful and awesome day, week, and life. And may the desires of your heart be fulfilled, and may your goals and your visions never cease, that you may be blessed from the heavens above and that you may be nourished from the earth below, is my desire and wish for all of you. And I leave you these things, and I thank you. And goodbye.